This is Officer Curtis Morgan. Curtis is in my community affairs unit, so he's actually doing basically the same thing we're doing here. Curtis is in charge of promoting the issues that the sheriff's office is dealing with. So he's just taking some pictures and grabbing a couple videos here and there. So that's all he's here for. And with Curtis is Joe Lisi. Joe's my undersheriff. Joe's the number 2 guy at the sheriff's office, and this is the topic he's just, like I said, just trying to build his information and his knowledge base on. So they're 2 of the nicest guys in the sheriff's office. So I was just telling them, undersheriff, you're not my bodyguard. No. Again, thank you for having me. Certainly, I want to welcome Garrett the opportunity to debate Gary on this issue or to talk on this issue. Obviously, we're talking about the same thing here. We're on opposite sides of the issue. And that's what America's all about. I have my opinion. He has his, as do the folks here in the audience. And at the end of the day, a decision is made. Whatever decision is made, whenever it is made, it's my job as a sheriff to respect that decision, and we enforce the laws that the legislature passes. So, and then I'm obviously in a position where I can use my position as the sheriff, but also this year I'm currently serving as the president of the New York State Sheriff's Association. I was elected by the 61 other sheriffs in New York State to represent our organization as a whole for the year 2019. So it's been a busy year. Briefly, obviously it's clear to everyone that I do not support the legalization of recreational use of marijuana. Earlier on, when I was introduced, we spoke. She mentioned briefly about the DARE program. Back in the 90s, I was the DARE officer. At the time, DARE stood for Drug Abuse Resistance Education. I was the DARE officer for 6 years in the Whitesboro Central School District. I had an opportunity to work with about 2,200 kids one-on-one directly over those 6 years. And obviously part of that program and part of the curriculum then was teaching kids to make the right decisions and to say no to drugs. And certainly, my position and my feeling is that marijuana is a gateway drug. And I felt my entire career as a police officer that it was my obligation to educate folks the best that I could and utilize the resources available to me. And the one thing, as this issue debated and went on in the state legislature over the past few years, and certainly came to a head in this last legislative session, and the message that the sheriffs nearly unified, not all sheriffs, but nearly all of the sheriffs of New York State, we agree that that on this issue, we want to learn from the mistakes of other states. We don't want to suffer from the mistakes of other states. So when we looked at data, seeing traffic fatalities rising 151% in the state of Colorado, we looked at traffic deaths have doubled between 2013 and 2017 in states where marijuana was legalized. First and foremost, that was the most important thing to me. And again, as this event goes on this morning, I'm sure we'll get into a lot more issues. But in general topics, overall increase in crime rate, the black market operations, those are all concerns that we, the sheriffs, have on this issue. And probably our biggest issue, and it doesn't pertain to either side of this, but this issue, like bail reform and like so many other issues, are being inserted into a budget process. We want to ensure that that doesn't happen. We want to have the opportunity to debate these issues like we're doing here today. This should be done on the state legislative level so that the issue can be debated, and then obviously the senators and the assembly people can make informed decisions on how they feel. So thank you, and I look forward to our conversation this morning.
Good morning. I'm Gary Colmey, 65-year-old husband, father, grandpa, business owner, and as the sheriff said, I'm certainly a pro-cannabis advocate and activist. I was appointed along with our sheriff to Senator Griffith's panel of experts on the subject, and I'm certified in cannabis fundamentals and cultivation by Green Flower Media. They're America's #1 educational resource for cannabis and all things cannabis. I've been quoted and filmed and broadcast across all CNY media outlets multiple times as founder of my Legalize It CNY Cannabis Legalization Initiative, with over 1,150 members who publicly participate. I want to thank Ann Popio for having me here today to discuss the many issues surrounding cannabis legalization and the realities we see more and more as states legalize adult use in an open free market. So today we're going to debate the pros and cons of New York State becoming one of those states who followed the will of their people. whom, by the way, number over 60% in New York State, and to set up a legal, safe, regulated, responsible, adults-only cannabis market of our own. Should we? Should we not? Why? Why not? I'd much prefer to first have given a talk on the history of the plant, its benefits as medicine and for wellness, and how prohibition came about, and how horribly that's worked out for us. But we don't have that much time this morning, so we can't do that. Just please know that I am available to give informational talks on cannabis, both THC and CBD producing plants and products, and how they can be a wonderful adjunct to better lives with less pain, anxiety, and discomfort, and how cannabis use can wean people off of pharmaceuticals with their horrible side effects. I know that's medical by definition, but there's another much more common reason people use cannabis. And that's for personal, here's the word, wellness, for wellness. And which demographic is the fastest growing group of new cannabis users for both medicine and wellness? Seniors. Seniors. Medicare-age people, people over 65. Historically, they're the group that may, when polled, oppose it more, but they are definitely the fastest growing group of people who are discovering cannabis as a wellness adjunct. I'm one now. I turned 65 last year. We are on tons of prescription medications, many with horrible side effects, including death. You see it every night on the news. If the prescription, if you or a loved one has died, don't take it, including death. So if we can get the same results or even better results and outcomes naturally, by calling on a plant that's been used for thousands of years with little to no side effects, has never killed anybody in the history of man, why wouldn't we try that? Now we know the arguments against it, and we know who's making them. We know who goes from town to town rallying law enforcers with false alarms of death and doom should we legalize cannabis. They go wherever legislation is pending, and they're based in Virginia, not in New York. Just last September, the New York State Joint Commission on Public Ethics denied their New York chapter an exemption from disclosing their donors. Donors who spent over $85,000 rallying against cannabis legalization in New York State last year. Who are they? They're the most quoted and publicized organization you'll see repeatedly in opposition of our rights and our freedoms when it comes to cannabis. They are Project SAM. Project SAM, remember the name, Project SAM. The deplorable work of a guy named Kevin Sabet and his partners and board members who largely represent for-profit drug rehabs. Like their major contributors, Mel and Betty Sembler, who's now shuttered drug rehabs they called Straight Inc., subjected children to unusual punishment, infliction of pain, humiliation, intimidation, ridicule, coercion, threats, mental abuse, and interference with daily living functions like eating, sleeping, and toileting. And for what? Because a kid got caught with some pot? See, marijuana rehab, it's got to be the most profitable way to make money from cannabis there is, short of actually selling it. You know, they'll say, let's decriminalize. So there's still plenty of it out there. When they decriminalize, it's right out there. And then they profit from kids who cross that fine line from possession to more serious charges because the weed was in a few baggies, or maybe they shared it with somebody like kids do. Then, when they're court mandated or ordered or plea bargained to a paid rehab program, we can say, but nobody's in jail for it. Well, who pays? Mom and dad's insurance pays. Or worse, we pay when our counties and our jurisdictions subsidize some of these rehabs. And there's no definitive treatment for marijuana addiction because it just doesn't rise to that distinction. Sure, it can be overused like anything else, but there's no withdrawal, there's no horrible detox like even if you quit coffee, or booze, or pills, or cigarettes. And they're all legal. Nobody prostitutes or commits robbery for cannabis. Never happens. So my message today is please listen to all sides with an open mind, and more importantly, question what you hear today. Question the sources, question the data. As New York gears up for another shot at adult use legalization in 2020. Thank you.
This may be a good time to get into if marijuana is legalized. Has any consideration been made to educating the public, having an educational program, as we have seen with alcohol? How will the cultural transition affect society, or will it make much difference at all? If we legalize marijuana, we want people to be able to use it responsibly as they do alcohol, and we know what the situation is with alcohol. So at this point, I'd like to ask our guests to speak on this. And I also invite you to chime in with your questions, because this is an informational meeting for you, and I'd like you to be able to chime in. Please address our guests respectfully and ask them your questions. Chair?
Sure, thank you. Well, obviously, like I said in the beginning, if a law, whether we're talking about this topic or any other, if something is placed in the law through our process, then it's our obligation to enforce that law. So certainly if marijuana is legalized, then it is what it is at the end of the day. But whether it is legalized or not, we still have an obligation. When I say we, our society has an obligation to educate people on the proper use of something and the improper use of something, the side effects, the potential side effects. If we're talking about marketing, if this is in fact going to be something that would be legal for people over the age of 21, we have to ensure that there's proper education and proper marketing techniques so we don't focus our attention on people under the age of 21. Unfortunately, like we've seen with other products that I certainly don't agree with, they are legal to use, but I am not one of the users of them, but they do focus on marketing for younger people. When you look at placements of stores, when you look at colors of ads, or characters, or types of people that are in ads, then certainly they're geared towards something. And in many cases, if we're talking tobacco, we're talking alcohol, a lot of times, in many cases, they're geared towards younger people. Because again, they see that there's an opportunity there to make money. And look, at the end of the day, just a couple myths out there that our jails are full of people who are arrested on marijuana charges. Incorrect. I've been the sheriff for 9 years. I have never had anyone in my custody at our correctional facility for singly unlawful possession of marijuana. Unlawful possession of marijuana is a non-custodial arrest. People cannot be sentenced to jail time for unlawful possession of marijuana. Bail cannot be set for unlawful possession of marijuana charges. Specifically, it's mentioned that law enforcement makes money off arresting people for unlawful possession of marijuana, or any charge. If we could talk any charge, a sheriff's office makes nothing off people getting arrested. The fines that are taken from people who are found guilty or people who plead to a lesser charge and a fine is set, those fine monies go to the state government and the local government where the court is located. Law enforcement gets zero, okay? United County Sheriff's Office gets zero revenue from traffic tickets, marijuana arrests, any penal law arrests, any of that. So that is totally 100% a myth that if marijuana gets legalized, my budget will take a hit. Incorrect. We receive no money from marijuana arrests. So there's just, and again, whether we look at studies, whether we talk about what we deal with specifically here in our community or other communities, like I said, it's certainly it's a topic that I'm passionate about, and like I said, in my position, I feel strongly that it should not be legalized.
Can I respond to that before we take the questions?
Yes.
To the same thing you did?
Just the person that would like to answer the question.
When we talk about marketing to children and that we can't, that it would go the same way as alcohol and tobacco, when's the last time anyone saw Joe Camel? When's the last time anybody saw Marlboro Man? See, that's a non sequitur. We can, certainly, we can regulate how things are advertised. You don't see, when's the last time you saw Winston taste good like cigarettes should? See, I remember all those, and only some of the older people won't, some of the younger people won't remember cigarette commercials. But we certainly can regulate those things, and we certainly can make responsible decisions in an open, regulated cannabis marketplace. It takes money. Where would the money come from for education? Well, in Massachusetts, it's 20% tax on all recreational cannabis purchases. Right now, I happen to know that a lot of that money is coming from New York, so we're doing a lot to educate kids, and there are billboards in Massachusetts, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Vermont, Maine, and the places the 11 states that have legalized cannabis. And part of that is a robust educational situation, where there are billboards, where the people go into schools, where even I will agree with the sheriff, if we do get legal recreational cannabis and we get the full breadth of it like they have in other states, we definitely do need education around it, because we'll have edibles and we'll have some more potent forms of it maybe people aren't used to using. It's important for people to learn to start low and start low and go slow. But also, cannabis is not new. It's been around for 3,000 plus years. So this, if we do this or if we don't, I've made and within my group membership, we've said this a lot among each other, won't change my life, whether we legalize it or not. It's easier to get the NyQuil right now. It's easier to get than a bottle of NyQuil. If I want to buy a bottle of NyQuil, I have to bring my ID to Price Chopper. If I want to buy cannabis in Massachusetts, which I'll do sometimes, I'll show my ID 4 times from the time I go into the building until the time I get out. Often guided out of the building and out of the parking lot. One in particular in Northampton, where we like to go, staffed by off-duty police officers who help my wife out of the car in the handicap spot and guide me out. What a wonderful relationship law enforcement has with the cannabis community in Northampton, Massachusetts. So, but my main message and my main response, I think this was, how do we keep it out of the hands of children? Well, we won't 100%, we don't now. But the difference will be in a regulated cannabis market. If some cannabis does get into the hands of kids, and God help the parents that let it happen, because it shouldn't happen, but the odds of it being a safe substance, a substance that's been inspected, that's been analyzed and deemed safe for human consumption, that's what will be in the kids' hands. And the people who sell cannabis now on the black market, a lot of them will sell you anything. And they'll feed it with anything, and they'll fertilize it with anything. You don't know what you're getting. But the people who go to Massachusetts by the thousands know what they're getting. And it's already here. And that's my response to that.
Thank you. Okay, open for questions?
I had a question for the sheriff.
Yes, sir.
Could you, how would you envision the climate if New York State legalizes marijuana? And it becomes a non-issue when you go out to the community, that it's not even an issue whether they have a bag of it or you're not there for marijuana, you're there for true crimes and trying to solve issues in the community. Could you envision that as a positive?
Well, again, going back to my foundation as a police officer, prior to being the sheriff, I spent about 22 years as a police officer on the street, dealing with, for the most part, obviously in progress calls, things that are lots of traffic accidents. So like I said, I keep going back on the fact, looking at numbers from various sources of traffic fatalities. So my biggest concern with what's going to happen on the road, if it is legalized, how do we prohibit or how do we stop people from being under the influence and then driving an automobile? Because again, it's going to go back to, there's going to have to be education, there's going to have to be stiff penalties for people who violate that law. There is no technology currently to measure a person's THC level when they're arrested for driving while ability impaired by marijuana. So there's no technique. Obviously, we have drug recognition experts that do field sobriety or field testing to attempt to build a case to make an arrest, then obviously blood is taken and obviously blood work and not to bring up a whole nother issue, but now we're getting into discovery issues, which is part of bail reform, which further complicates our job. But at the end of the day, like I said, I think public safety is going to be first and foremost. So again, if a substance is legalized, maybe this will answer your question better. Like alcohol is legal for people over 21. It really has no bearing on if we're there to investigate something else and we find alcohol, not a big deal because it's legal. I mean, it's not. So I don't know if I answered your question.
What's the current policy, if I could follow up?
As far as
Marijuana, just not medical marijuana, but if you go to a residence, you go into someone's car,
okay.
you start prying into their personal
Well,
belongings.
again, now you're opening up a whole nother avenue. I mean, obviously there are laws that dictate search and seizure policies that we have to follow. Obviously, we can't look somewhere without a search warrant, or we can't look somewhere without permission from someone. So again, if in the course of an investigation marijuana is found, depending on the circumstances, nothing may come of it. But obviously, in the course of executing a search warrant that's duly signed by a judge, and that's part of what we're looking for, then yeah, it would be.
See, I'm having a hard time wrapping around this part of it now, because now it's really not decriminalized. Because if there's a stigma with marijuana or the use of it.
Well, you mentioned stigma. That's the first time you mentioned that in your question, stigma. That's a whole other issue.
Well, I'm just saying it anyways.
So, but my point is, I'll use alcohol for an example. I don't drink, but if I'm working with someone who's intoxicated, that I don't have a stigma there. I have a job to do.
Right.
And if they're the victim of a case, I could care less if they're intoxicated or not. That's not why I'm here. So, I mean, like I said, I've got 31 years on this job. I've never had a stigma about anybody with anything. I have a job to do. If you're a victim of a crime, you're going to get our fullest attention, and it's going to be done appropriately. And if it's not by one of my people, then we deal with that otherwise on our end.
I think in further response to that, and it goes back to what I said earlier, we talk about data, we talk about fatalities and deaths, highway deaths, things like that. Question the data, folks. I know a lot of it, and comes from various sources. I've heard the sheriff on other broadcast media quote AAA, for instance. Well, I've been a member of AAA for 40 years, and they never asked me, you know. AAA is currently under some very intense scrutiny and criticism for misleading comments and positions not taken by their members like me, because they're grossly manufacturing and distorting their own data. Their data simply began to factor in marijuana testing for traffic fatality incidents. Just began to factor it in with everything else. Most often they'll factor it in, it'll be alcohol or drugs. So when you factor in cannabis, you're factoring it in with every other drug there is. Illegal street drugs, opiates, prescription drugs. They failed to mention that. In all the states where they had their representatives, AAA representatives, were lobbying against legalization bills, and they're crying that the highways of Colorado, for example, were going to run red with blood. What they're not telling you is that overall highway traffic fatalities fell in that state during the process of legalization, implementation, and growth of the legal order. So it's very disingenuous the way they're presenting the information. Now when I say overall traffic deaths dropped 11%, they did, but the data you're going to hear is that more people are testing positive for marijuana. Well, they are, because they didn't test anybody before. And THC, as the sheriff said, in one's bodily fluid, only if it shows up in your blood, can only prove that you may have used it in the last 30 days. As the sheriff said, there is no definitive test for marijuana impairment. Except I would say there is, because we've had roadside sobriety tests, physical sobriety tests. And by the way, if I'm on a jury and I see one of you or myself on body cam footage that says I'm too impaired to be driving, I want you off the road, and I shouldn't be on the road either. And it doesn't matter to me whether it's coffee, a fight with your wife, alcohol, prescription drugs, street drugs, even cannabis, which is possible to overuse it to the point where, yes, you can be impaired. No one I know uses it that way, but it is possible. So please, question the data, and know that the data is highly questionable depending on the source. But we could go back and forth, your study, my study, your study, my study. We can go there, and we'll just get mired all day in that. It was numbers and my percents and your percents. Think of your subjective experiences. The sheriffs are with DARE. He talks about DARE. I'm positive that the sheriff's motivations with DARE were pure and right. But the data for DARE is there too, ladies and gentlemen. Kids who went through the DARE program were actually more likely to do drugs, even hard drugs, later in life than kids that didn't go through it. Look it up yourself, folks. That is such common knowledge. That's my next one.
I have a question. My background is in health education. As in many cases, when something becomes legal, do you feel that usage would go up and then it would fall down and level off? I think that would happen.
In what age group? No, that'd be the key. In what age group? Usage among seniors goes up
Yeah.
because they discover. You know what's really remarkable? Usage among teens either stays the same, goes down a little bit, and the states attribute that often to it's no longer as cool, you know, when mom or dad are doing it, when grandma or grandpa are doing it, it's really not that cool anymore. They go on to other things, and fortunately, less chemical things. So that's an interesting point, though. That does it go up, and will it go up overall? Probably. But when it does go up overall, it also means, as far as my research indicates, that people make a choice. So when we admit and acquiesce that cannabis is less harmful than alcohol, and according to the data that I studied, overall traffic deaths go down, it seems like people might be making a choice to use something less harmful. So if this goes up, good, and if this alcohol goes down, I see that as a net gain. Sheriff, you want to respond?
Sure. Again, you know, when something is legalized, and to be honest with you, this will, for me to experience personally, when something is legalized, to see what happens, it'll be a first, because obviously the age was set for alcohol and tobacco, you know, as I was growing up. It was predetermined what it was going to be. Obviously, tobacco just changed from 18 to 21, so I mean, we're actually looking at that now to see how that's going to, what's actually going to happen. I don't know. It's a good question. I can only assume if something's legalized, you're probably going to see usage increase. But at the end of the day, the black market is still in existence also. You know, so again, people who are going to choose to use are going to look at, you know, do we purchase it legally and pay the tax that's going to be on it, because we know at the end of the day, it's an opportunity for government to raise more revenue. Or are people going to use something on the street that they don't know a lot about and are going to pay a cheaper price and end up having it, you know, obviously be totally different from what they thought they were going to get if they were to purchase it legally. So I would say that that's yet to be determined.
Well, I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
I'm Gary.
Gary, you made pot, or whatever you want to call it, like a plus.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Like a plus, like a present. You're making marijuana sound like a present. And what my concern is, if I have an anxious grandchild, and they're 21, and I'm going to advocate that they use pot, do you have any history or data that would tell me what the chances are that they're going to get addicted to it, that they're going to be using it morning, noon, and night? And I know people who maybe not every day, 3 times a day,
So what's the potential for overuse as you're talking?
I don't know what use is.
Well, we have nearly 100,000 medical marijuana patients in New York today. By the way, all driving to and from the dispensaries that all have parking lots. The list of qualifying conditions opens up more and more every day. So how many of them are using it just for general wellness? And when we talk about those 100,000 using it, those are people who have, I like to say, paid the toll. Who have gone to their doctor first, and there's a $200 doctor's appointment with a copay, and then they'll be referred to a medical marijuana prescribing doctor who took a 45-minute course on how to prescribe medical marijuana, generally. There's another copay, another $200, and then there's the dispensary costs. So my message there is the great majority of people who use cannabis medically or for wellness don't have cards. So I would say there's probably well over 1 million in New York State. It's hard to say. But would some people overuse it? It's possible. It's possible. Some people that are prone to addiction on anything. Some people overuse coffee. Some people overuse alcohol, prescription medications. A legal, regulated market would be a responsible market. So we could mitigate those things through the tax money we collect. Do I have the numbers? No, I don't have the numbers. We don't have a market yet. We don't have anything to measure. But we do have a lot of other states to look at. One's, like I say, Massachusetts. Anytime I've been to a Massachusetts dispensary, better than half the cars are from New York at a 20% tax rate. So there's a whole lot of money being spent there that could be being spent here on good things. So I hope that answered as closely as I could.
Just real quick,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I would definitely have concerns for, again, to agree with Gary, any substance. I mean, there is always the potential that someone is going to use it too much, and then it becomes an addiction, it becomes a way of life. And certainly, we see in this community, every community, that there are significant downfalls to various types of addiction. So again, I think, in my opinion, when we legalize something like this, it's going to encourage use, and that's going to then lead to misuse.
I think you've hit my concern. I think people can get over-attracted to substances that have a mixed result. They can be helpful, but they can also be addicting. And on the same level, they can also get attracted to aversions. They'd rather smoke the pot than do what they have to do. It's not easy to be out of work and find a new job.
That could be the pot or anything, ma'am.
But
There are lazy people.
with medications, opioids out there, and the kids are taking those, they're being prescribed Ritalin, and these things are known to upper up the kids, and it's not good, it's not healthy for them. There's chemical changes within their body. With marijuana, that doesn't happen. On a personal experience, that doesn't happen. I have kids, I have grandkids, and I am here to represent legalization because they can't afford it medically. It's too expensive. If it was regulated and legalized for everybody, whether it was kids that take Ritalin or antidepressants to seniors that need it for Parkinson's, on a health basis, it works better than pharmaceuticals, in my opinion, in my experience.
I just want to say, are you aware, do they get any federal funds for marijuana prohibition from the sheriff's department of the county?
Do we get federal funding? We do not.
No federal funding?
We get no absolute, no federal funding, no.
Say you're driving, the person next to you is medical,
Yeah, we certainly don't need
Yeah,
to.
we're good.
Say you're driving and the person next to you is a medical marijuana card. And you know it, but, and you get stopped. You get stopped because you're just maybe carrying on a conversation with this person. Who would be liable if you got stopped? The driver, because that person is, maybe the police officer looked at him and thought his eyes were bloodshot, wasn't able to.
So in your example, you're a passenger in that car? Are you a passenger in that car? I'm trying to get.
Driving the car, but my passenger has a medical marijuana card,
Okay.
and he is using CBD oil.
Okay. And that would mean nothing to us. I mean, obviously,
Or
we're
anybody.
concerned. We're, so you're saying if you're driving the car, we could use anything for an example. If you're the driver of a vehicle and your passenger is doing something illegal, okay, whatever it is, you, obviously they would be the one charged with doing something illegally, okay? Correct. I mean, there are some, there are times like if, and I'm gonna use a totally hypothetical here that is I'm going way off here, just if you and I decided to rob a bank together, and I drove the car and you went in and did the bank robbery, we're both gonna get charged with robbing the bank.
Whoa, I don't think that's a good idea, Sheriff.
I agree. But if I'm driving the car, you're my passenger, and you are possessing marijuana illegally, you're the one that would get charged, not me as the driver. So medical, no, it's not. No one would get charged.
Well, I'll say what I say to all my group members who are always making their trips to Massachusetts. Don't spark up in the car, for goodness sakes. I mean, be responsible. Be responsible cannabis users. The cannabis users I know are, and if you are irresponsible, if you're smoking in the car,
It's like anything. I mean,
it's not wise.
for early in my career, for 3 years, my only job, I went to work 7 at night till 3 in the morning, and I removed drunk drivers from the roadway. I don't drink. I could walk up to a car. As soon as someone put the window down, I could get the odor of the alcoholic beverage from within that car. Whether it was the driver or passenger or empty beer cans in the back, I was able to detect that just because it's not something, just like a cigarette smoker. If you you go to somewhere where people are smoking and then you go home and you go to hang your jacket up, everyone in the house, if they don't smoke, they know that you came from somewhere where there was smoke. So again, it's
And currently in New York State, there are no legal medical cannabis products that smell at all, because there are no cannabis products for sale in the medical marijuana dispensaries that look anything like marijuana at all. None. Our medical marijuana program is a laughing stock of the whole country because it doesn't allow marijuana. It just allows things that they've extracted, things that we really don't want to even use, and they are the reason that more medical marijuana card-holding patients in New York State now go to Massachusetts for the medicine and pay the 20% sales tax, than go to Remedy here in New Hartford to buy pot juice, is what they call it, vape cartridges. Vape cartridges. Does that ring a bell to anybody right now? Vape cartridges? Poison. I mean, even the ones from the dispensaries, I will say they're not poison. They've been inspected, they've been analyzed and deemed safe. But anybody using vape cartridges, even from legal New York State medical marijuana inspected, analyzed products, I'll call y'all guinea pigs. We are guinea pigs. We don't know the long-term, and this seems odd coming from me, doesn't it? We don't know the long-term effects of vaping cannabis oils that have been mixed with other things. We don't know the long-term. But we do know that we have 3,000 plus years of people using plant material, never having killed a single person. That's my response.
Yes.
Sheriff?
yes.
You said earlier that you didn't make any money off of cannabis or anything,
Correct.
like that. When they had their undercover narcotics program here in Utica County, I mean, I was told that the vehicles and everything and anything they confiscated was put on eBay and sold.
From marijuana sales? I
Marijuana,
don't know the,
any
I
type
don't
of-
know
any type of
the.
drugs, any type of drug bust.
Absolutely, I mean, we have
Even
narcotics.
marijuana, Even marijuana.
We have narcotics investigators that work both local cases, state cases, federal cases, and when these cases are disposed of, there is a disbursement of seizure money, whether it was vehicles
Right.
or funding from them, which would be dispersed to the agencies involved, and that money could only be used for certain things. But what I said earlier today was we do not receive any fine money, we never have ever received any fine money from any local court jurisdictions. It's just the way the system is set up in the state of New York. The sheriff's office, because we obviously the jurisdiction in the whole county, if there's a ticket or an arrest in the village of Yorkville, okay, when that is disposed of, the village of Yorkville gets a portion of that revenue, and the state of New York gets the rest. The sheriff's office gets zero from that. That's what I was referring to.
Okay.
We have received vehicles from seizures of convicted drug dealers. I'm not talking marijuana users. We have received seizure money from convicted drug dealers, not marijuana users. Big difference, big difference.
I'm gonna take one more question.
Yes, sir.
I heard is that if you're pulled over and they do take blood work, there's a 3-hour window. And if you just smoked or whatever, 3-hour window that you can still be detected if you did the blood work on marijuana.
On marijuana, actually, blood work, marijuana will stay in your system for a
Well,
very
6
long
weeks.
time.
Up to a month.
If you pull over though, there's a 3-hour window where that high period is of the THC.
That I'm not specifically sure, but anytime, like if we took a blood sample from someone, or even a straight DWI arrest, if we administer a breath test to someone, I'm dating myself, we used to use breathalyzers back when I was on the street. They don't use them anymore, but every person, you have the opportunity to have your own independent test taken, absolutely. And if, you know, a blood test or whatever, that you certainly could get your own test taken to
Right.
dispute the potential results of the law enforcement lab test. Yes.
That's what I was told
Yep.
anyway.
I also think when you compare cannabis to alcohol in terms of testing, as the sheriff says, there is no definitive test for cannabis intoxication. And when we talk about the fact that there are thousands of medical marijuana patients on the streets every day, there are. So one person could have consumed 100 milligrams of THC that morning, and you'll see them shopping in Walmart. That's because they consumed 100 milligrams of a THC product that morning. Where another person, 100 milligrams of THC will, lock them to the couch. So we two different people can handle it two totally different ways. Not so with alcohol. A really high BAC number, really does across the board, and the sheriff knows, I mentioned earlier, I worked as an EMT for 6 or 8 years with Federal Ambulance Company in Rome, New York, so I was at a lot of accident scenes myself that time. A person with that high BAC, they're not, that's a pretty good indication. In fact, that's a really good indication they shouldn't have been driving. But a high number that you can get that's a THC number could be, for a heavy user, as much as 30 days ago they consumed cannabis. And for a medical user, it could be as little as an hour ago they consumed cannabis, and yet they're not impaired at all. So that's where, and that's where I know that the sheriff and law enforcement has a problem with it, and I get it, because I don't think there'll ever be a definitive way to prove impairment with a number through a bodily fluid analysis.
They're trying.
But I trust their eyes. I trust all the officers' eyes and ears, and I trust body cams. And again, if I'm on the jury and you're tanked, I'm voting guilty.
Any other questions?
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Have you thought how you're gonna feel if, God forbid, one of your family members, maybe children, grandchildren, cousins, need a medical marijuana card, and they can see 100% how they feel it's helping them? How are you gonna feel knowing that?
Well, I don't think at any time myself or any police chief in the state of New York or sheriff in the state of New York or DA in the state of New York, this was never about the legal use of medical marijuana at all. We've always said we oppose the legalization of recreational use marijuana, because I am in no position to second guess you know, obviously medical professionals, but obviously there's a legal process to legalize something as a medicine. I mean, there's a process when something becomes a drug, you know, through the federal government, because at the end of the day, and again, I'm gonna put you know, the oath that I took to enforce the laws of this, not only this state, but of this country, at the end of the day, marijuana still remains illegal in the federal government's eyes. So New York is gonna have to figure that out too, because that puts law enforcement in a very unique predicament when something is legal on a state level, but it's illegal on a federal level. Because at the end of the day, like I keep saying, whether it's legal or not, it's my job to enforce the law. So if it's a law that's been legally passed, then absolutely we will do what the law says. But this is putting us, this potentially could put law enforcement in a very unique predicament.
Well, that dichotomy is being
Laws are
worked out.
butting heads.
Excuse me. That dichotomy is being worked out in the 11 states so far, seem to be okay with that. And yeah, federal law needs to catch up, and if you look at pending legislation, they're working on it.
Would you be for the prohibition of alcohol?
Again, I don't foresee that ever happening, okay?
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically,
prohibition
I
of
mean,
alcohol.
I mean, when I say I don't drink, I mean, you may catch me having in a year period, maybe a 6-pack, okay?
Friends, family
That's
members.
it, absolutely. So again, I think it's all about being able to,
Responsible adults.
absolutely.
Decisions.
No,
That's what we want as well. That's what we want as well.
You know, and again, it's like anything. You know, again, a person makes a choice, and there's consequences that come with the choice that they make.
Yes.
But our fear, whether we're talking about this or other issues, and I keep bringing up bail reform because that's just something we've been dealing with so much in the past 2 months. There are victims out there that are attached to many of these cases. I'm not talking marijuana, but the bail reform cases, and we can never forget about the victim. We can never forget about the victim who was plowed down by someone who was impaired by some substance. Whether it was marijuana, cocaine, or alcohol, there's still a victim there. I mean, we are the ones, and certainly the undersheriff's been around in this job a lot longer than I have. There's been countless doors that he's knocked on in the middle of the night to tell someone that their loved one has been killed by someone who made a bad choice, whatever the choice may be. All right, and we are just trying to do everything that we can to properly educate the public to prevent those things from happening.
I would just counter, you can't legislate the risk out of life. That's the foundation of our country, the freedoms that we have.
Absolutely.
Bad things are going to happen. You can't, you know, it would become a dystopia if we legislated everything to that point.
I'm not saying legislate.
You're probably for a lot of freedoms, but then my freedom has to be imposed on, it doesn't seem correct. That's
I hope we can, and I said it earlier, man, I wish I could have, and it'd be easy for me to give a 1 hour, 2 hour talk about cannabis and what it is. So I'll try to squish it down to something really, really small. But prior to 1992, we really didn't know that much about it. I know coming from me, but we really did. I say we've been using it for 3,000 years, and we have, but we didn't discover the endocannabinoid system, the largest system of neurotransmitters in our bodies, until 1992. We knew that we were using it and we were feeling good, and doctors from hundreds of years ago were using it for this malady and that malady, but they didn't really understand why it worked. And now we do. So do some research about your endocannabinoid system and how cannabinoids work. The cool thing about the endocannabinoid system is inside our bodies, we make virtually the same components that are in the cannabis plant. So what we're doing when we use the cannabis plant is finding a balance or homeostasis so our bodies are more in balance and do better. But having said that, and some of my members, you may think it's odd coming from me, but if you're just smoking to get high, you're doing it wrong, you know. But no one I know does anymore. If you're just smoking to be impaired and you can't remember the damn movie you had on television that night, well, that was a waste. So my observation is with medical users, and as the sheriff says, he's not opposed to medical use. It's a very fine line between medical use and wellness use. And then there's another line for medical or wellness use to people who just use it to get all tore up. I personally don't know anybody like that. No one like that. But I will admit they must exist. And if they do, they have a problem. They would have a problem with anything you give them. So people do use alcohol to alter their consciousness. People have been altering their consciousness forever. But when I look at what people use cannabis for, it's for a little bit better mood. It's to increase appetite, maybe. And I'm not talking about, maybe you'll call it medical, maybe you'll call it wellness. At the end of the day, a person that maybe had a bad day at work goes home and maybe they go a little bit nicer to their wife or their husband. Or maybe their dinner tastes a little bit nicer. Or maybe they think, cannabis is a type of substance that makes you, opens your calmness and you're able to reflect and opens your creative side. So maybe you think of that person that might have said something to you that day and he had a crossword and it occurs to you, we call it a stoner's epiphany, they'll call it. I need to call that person. All I see is good. I don't see people doing bad. I don't see people fighting when they use cannabis. I see people being slightly better versions of themselves the way they want to be, not the way I think you should be. And again, my message there, if I could drive home anything, is that if you're using it just to the point to be tore up or intoxicated, you're doing it wrong.
I started smoking marijuana at a young age. I really think that it affected my life, not just the law enforcement part of going to jail for half a year, but I think it stopped my ambition to further my life. And that's probably because it's just me. Some people have a great life. I have 3 sons. I always was a hypocrite. I said, don't do what I do, or do as I say. Stay away from it. My middle son started doing it. Got accepted to University of Albany. He was doing it, and I prayed, and he quit. He was doing not so well when he quit smoking pot. His greatest story. I really, you gotta keep, you can't, it's a lose-lose situation. You can't keep it out of kids' hands. It's always gonna find a way into a kid's hands, but the brain doesn't fully develop until you're in your 20s. And I think it changed, I think it changed my life. But I've done time in jail. I have 4 possession of marijuana. I did 6 months in jail.
Final question, Carol?
Yeah, I do. I understand that both of you are presenting that people need to make responsible decisions. But I think that we're not looking at the younger people. And when I say that people is this gentleman just said their brains don't develop. I was told it was until 25 where they could make a decision and know that there's consequences for those decisions. And what I'm hearing is some of these young people are smoking in front of babies are in the house and things like that. And believe me, there is no literature that says what the effects are. And to say that there are no effects, I find it hard to believe because infants' brains are developing from birth until 25. How could it not affect them in some way? And so my point is, yes, it's good if people can use these things responsibly, but I think a lot of the population is not responsible. I think that's where the problem is. And if you see it that way,
I see a robust, regulated, responsible adult use program opens the doors to education for all those things.
Yes.
And again, I would hope that there would be an aggressive educational programs. Unfortunately, this state has a long history when we establish laws that appear that there'll be debate associated with those. We tend to bury them inside, like I said in the beginning, the state budget. So what happens is, this debate that's happening here, this is great. This is what our country is all about. This needs to happen on the floor of the state capitol. But because there is division, more than likely we won't see this debate on the floor where people like Gary can speak, and I can speak, and other experts can speak, and regular people can speak from the general public. That won't happen. What they'll do is they'll bury it into a budget. They'll take the legislators who are against it, okay, for whatever reason, and they'll start backing them into a corner and telling them that if you don't do this, support us here, we take funding away back home that you need for some project. We saw that with bail reform. We have been sounding the alarm for 18 months. Fall on deaf ears, they bury it in the budget, lo and behold, here we go. Bail reform is here. And again, they didn't, and I'm not saying I'm farthest thing from an expert. I am not an expert. I've been a cop for 31 years and a lot of personal experiences, and I just see that this process that we're establishing laws in the state of New York we're on a slippery slope, and I don't like it. These debates need to happen at a level where the decision makers are, but unfortunately they don't. We're lucky we have local legislators here. I mean, Senator Griffith put Gary and I on a panel. There was two sides to that issue, but unfortunately, the sides only hear what they want to hear. It didn't leave Utica, that panel that we sat on. It didn't leave here. So it's just unfortunate, you know, because if it's legalized and there's a great aggressive education program, that's great, but we still have to make sure that law enforcement has the resources they need to control the black market, because that will also flourish. It will. I mean, it happens with everything else.
So can we,
Yes.
I just have one final question, and you just about touched on it right now, is that, you know, there's two sides of this. We're gonna be, invaded with information from, say, pharmaceutical companies who are going to be very against legalization because it may do something to their market. And then you're going to be you're going to have the government that might, because money is the bottom line sometimes, that's going to overtax it and cause a problem. And, you know, we have to be cognizant of the fact that we don't want these things to influence our judgment, and this is things that have to be settled probably, as you said, on a state level. I mean, you have to be talked about so that no matter what happens, that it will be dealt with appropriately. I mean,
I certainly hope that happens that way, that there is debate and there is the ability for people to put their studies out there. But like I said, if I was a betting man, this is going to be pushed into the budget. The legalization of prostitution is going to be pushed into the budget, and further expansion on bail reform is going to be pushed into the budget this coming year. And unfortunately, neither one of our sides will be heard and a decision will be made. That's just a prediction. I have nothing to back that up. That's a personal prediction of mine.
well, I can't thank you both enough for being here. You're the best panelists you could ever have.
Thank you.
I got one more. I got a question just off the topic a little bit. How do you feel about if there is going to be a recreational market? How do you feel about home cultivation, like the pros, cons?
Could we touch on it just for a second? Because that's a huge issue among my membership. Home cultivation. Home cultivation. My mantra there's one way, 100%, one way to know that the cannabis you consume, what's in it, and more importantly, what's not in it. One way to know that it would be affordable for you, and that's to grow it yourself. It's not for everybody, and that doesn't mean everybody should have some giant cannabis garden, but 5, 6 to 8 plants for yourself in a responsible garden. Even if you have to register it with the state, I would have no problem registering my garden with the state. I think that's huge because it will be a lifeline to people. The sheriff has mentioned before he has no faith in how the tax money will be spent. Neither do I. Neither do I. He's right. New York State is famous for corruption and famous for backdoor deals. So homegrown to me is very important.
Real quick on the homegrown issue, if you remember, and I don't have it with me, but the first series of proposals that came out, there was a clause in there. I think a person could grow like 6 plants, could only be for themselves, it couldn't be shared or sold to anybody else. Again, from a law enforcement perspective, and if you guys aren't law enforcement, maybe you have someone in the family that is, you could ask them their opinion. There is no human possible way to police that, okay? So on the flip side, there's no way to police that. It's impossible. All right, but on the flip side, you have I'm gonna give you another group that I belong to, has nothing to do with this issue, but they took a position on marijuana. The New York State Farm Bureau was taking a position on marijuana, and people misconstrued their position a little bit. Their position was, and they just reiterated it at their state convention here a few weeks ago, they talk about, they don't support the legalization of marijuana, but if it is legalized, they want a seat at the table to determine how the farmers can benefit from it. Well, because they're thinking that this would, unfortunately, and I think wrongly, they're thinking this could solve the problems of the farm crisis that we're in right now. But I can assure you that that if it is legalized, the farms that are chosen by Albany, there's probably going to be a very few number of hand-picked, what do you call it, factory farms, very large farms, and the small farmer will never benefit from growing that. So that's just my thought again, just my opinion, and it's again, I just want this to be fair and open, and at the end of the day, let the system work for itself.
You're talking about personal gardens for personal use, right?
Yeah.
I agree with the sheriff totally on you know, what corporate cannabis is likely to look like in New York State. I'm not really optimistic either.
Great job, with all of you.
Thank you.
Okay.